Okay, so here's where we're at. We have our ability to purchase things now. You can go through, add things to your cart, and now the next step is to actually transfer this information to a receipt page. So I've already created this receipt page here, and we just need to populate it. In fact, it should already populate. There we go. And so all the information is here. You have a detailed list of all the items that are in here. And the other thing we want to do is be able to remove things from the cart in case you decided you don't want to purchase them anymore. So I want to go ahead and do this looking at the code behind this. Since it's already produced, it was a little bit more difficult to get this put together than I thought, and so I just want to step through what we have. So first thing, let's just go through all the code that we have so far. So this is the HTML document for the shop. Nothing on here should have changed. So this is basically what we've been working with since the start. Okay. And then the next one we'll look at is the shopping cart page. So it's very similar to our shopping page. The only difference is we added an ordered list instead of a table to store the information in. And the main reason I did that was just so that you can differentiate between how do you auto-generate for a table and how do you auto-generate for a list. You'll notice that I did put the header in this document, which that may not have been shown in previous videos, but I went ahead and added that in here. And I also added some spacing and added a link to cart.html in headers on both the shop.html and cart.html page, so that you can go to the cart from there. And this is kind of important that you have this because this is where it's going to show your invoice total, and that's going to be in the script. All right. Now the inventory.js. This is our JavaScript file which stores the inventory. If you're doing this for a client, this is where you would tell them to modify their menu list. I probably would separate the rest of the code so that it wouldn't be available to the client. Just say, hey, this is the only file you can edit, and they can go in and change what they're selling and how much they're selling it for. What changes did I make here? You probably see a lot of changes, and let's go ahead and look at what we have. All right, so a lot of this looks new. All right, so what we did have already was this bake cookie function from the 4th video. All right, and I've moved some of the update information to update what is being shown on the page. In fact, let's just kind of look at this top to bottom. So the first thing here is we have this cart remove function. And what the cart remove function is doing is you can pass it in a number, and it's going to look through the list, our cart, and say where is that item in that list. And then the splice, what this does is it removes a single item from the list. So I tell it what the index is, and then index +1 says I want just the one element. We'll look at splice in the future on how we can remove more than one element at a time. But right now we just want to remove the element, so it's the index and then the index +1, and it'll remove that one element. Right now I am logging this to the console. This is one of those areas where I was having difficulty working on this. And I wanted to see what the information was in the cart so that I could debug and track what was going on. I'm going to comment this line out. You do not need this in your final result, but if you want to include it so that you can test it as you're working on it, that might be useful. And then once we remove an item, we update. We call this update function. All right, and then just real quick, we'll look at the purchase. The purchase is the same as it was in the last video, where we're pushing an item into our cart, and then we're updating the cart. So in the update, all this does is update the little price symbol, but there's also one more piece here. So this calculates what the current price is for the total items in your cart, and then updates the HTML, and then this is why we added the header to both pages so that it would show up on both pages. And then the next step is to actually store the stuff into our cookie. So in the last video I told you that you can't directly insert a list into a cookie, and that's absolutely true. But what we can do is we can convert that list into a string. And we have a library available to us called JSON, J-S-O-N, which is an object notation library which allows you to convert complex objects into a string. And so that's what I'm using here. JSON has a function called stringify, and it'll take a list or an object and turn it into a string that can be stored as a cookie. So I'm encoding this list as a string, I'm saving this variable encoded, and then I'm baking a cookie, and I'm labeling it cart, and I'm giving it that encoded string. Okay, so let's look at the bake cookie real quick. In the bake cookie, you pass it the cookie name and the value that goes in there, and again we stringified that value, and this works just like it did in our cookie example. All right, when we want to get the cookies, one of the things I did was I wanted to make sure when you go to a page that the cookies were already loaded. So for example here, if I'm on the receipt page, but if I go back a page, you'll notice that the price still shows up. Well, if I didn't reload the cookies, that information would no longer be there, okay? So in order to keep that information, we need to load the cookies as the page reloads. All right, so, and that's the first thing that we do on each of the pages, and we'll see that in a moment. To load the cookies, again, we're working with this JSON string. I'm getting the cookie, and the getting cookie is the same as it was in our cookie example. And once I have that string, I'm going to take that string. If it's not null, I'm going to parse it. And that's part of the JSON library. What parse means is to separate something into its parts. So in this case, since we had a list stored, it's going to separate those parts into an actual list, and we're storing that list back in the cart. And then I do call the update function here, which will update the price, because of course when we're loading the page and we load all the stuff into our cart, we want to make sure that that price updates with it as well. Okay, all right, and again, the get cookie didn't change. Let me go ahead and show you the get cookie function here. So this is the same. I did update it with the part where we are getting the index after we're removing the name of the cookie when we go to the index for the start. So I did make that update to this code. All right. Next, let's look at the shop real quick. I did update the shop to include that load cookies, and I do want to point one thing out here. You'll notice that I have window dot in front of load cookies. As I was doing some research for this, I discovered that sometimes you can't directly access functions or variables from a separate JavaScript file. But if you create those elements in a separate JavaScript file, they're automatically added to the window DOM. So I can actually directly access variables and functions from a different JavaScript file that is loaded from your web page by accessing it through the window dot modifier. So I can say window dot and access any of those elements. So in this case, I'm loading the cookies from the inventory.js file inside my shop.js. So that's the one change I made here. All right, and then the last part is the cart. All right, so this is all new code. So the first thing is I created this function that will load on load, and the first thing it does is load those cookies. So we already looked at the load cookies function. This is to ensure when we go to this page that it has a current copy of the shopping cart so that it can populate that list. And then I created this function called refresh because one of the things was just because you load the cookies doesn't mean that it's going to have the information on the page. And those are not, I can't generate code from the other file onto this page because I would be I'm sharing that code with both the shop and the cart HTML page. So I wanted to make sure that I separated those. So this one, I have this refresh function which generates the invoice. It populates that list of things that we've purchased. So again, we have this loop that goes through that, and we're getting each item in the cart, and I'm adding it to the invoice as a list item. So we're putting down the name, and then we're setting the price. And make sure you use the to-fix-to on this. I noticed when I was working with this, if you don't do the to-fix-to, you can get some of your prices will have 4 or 5 digits precision, and I don't know about you, but I don't know how I can spend 1/1000th of a penny. So this is just a quick way to make sure that your numbers are correct. And then for the button, the onClick function will be drop, which I've written down here. And then we pass it the item number that you want it to drop, and we name the button remove. Okay, and then of course we get the invoice from the page, and then we set the inner HTML to this invoice that we just generated. In the drop, we just call cart remove with the item number, and then call refresh again, which will regenerate our invoice. And because we're setting inner HTML with that value, it will overwrite whatever was there previously. All right, so that's it. This is a completely functional shopping cart, and it should work for you. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you.